Okay, good evening and welcome to our fourth and final session of Under Jerusalem in a four-part series. And for those who, maybe, weren't here in the previous classes or need a bit of a reminder, I'll just quickly run us through the three classes and particularly where we left off last class. So in class one, we spoke about the first 100 years when Jerusalem was just being uncovered and explored by pretty much Christian Zionists. In our second class, we spoke about right after the Six-Day War and how Israeli Jews were first able to uncover ancient Jerusalem in and around the Old City. And then our last class, we brought us into the 1990s and even the early 2000s. Here you see a picture of Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat. And maybe people are looking at that and saying, I thought this was a class on archaeology, not politics. But it's nearly impossible to separate Jerusalem archaeology from politics. And just to remind us where we spoke about last week is before Ehud Barak, when Bibi Netanyahu was in his first term, he had the Western Wall tunnels, the northern exit opened up. And that caused massive riots, which led to a few hundred Palestinians and a few dozens of Israeli soldiers killed and many injured on both sides. And that, that happened. What happened before that was there was Solomon's Stable, which was on the Temple Mount. And there was a deal. There was a quiet deal. And all this was happening during Oslo, during the peace process and trying to minimize any kind of tension. But there was a deal, both sides begrudgingly, that the Palestinians would be able to have access and create their own mosque in Solomon's Stables, which is indeed just under the Temple Mount on the southeastern side. And in turn, the Jews would be able to go through the Western Wall tunnel and exit out the northern side. So when the Palestinians had their mosque, Bibi Netanyahu felt this deal was already made before his term. And it's time now for us to get our end of the deal. And as I explained, all hell broke loose when that happened. Now, continuing with that story, how we get to this picture of Camp David 2000, right around this time as well, just a few months prior, under Yasser Arafat, once they have turned Solomon's Stables into a mosque, they want an exit too. Well, if the Jews had the exit for the Western Wall, so it's dangerous if you don't have exits on both sides, etc. They wanted the same thing, and so they ended up basically destroying with all kinds of bulldozers, destroying the Temple Mount, a certain section of the Temple Mount, and disregarding anything that's below the surface level. And for archaeologists, this, of course, means basically throwing in the garbage all kinds of evidence of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And so when this picture was taking place, Camp David 2000, they're moving forward for peace. And basically these really tense issues are kind of pushed under the rug and really trying to minimize any kind of conflict. Now, you should also note that you can see over here, the Temple Mount was the one area that Arafat and Ehud Barak were not willing to compromise on, both claiming ownership over it. Of course, in September of 2000, after those meetings, Ariel Sharon makes a visit on the Temple Mount, who is the leader of Likud at this time. And after this, the Second Intifada breaks out. And there were attempts for peace. There were certain plans ahead, with Ariel Sharon becoming the prime minister. George Bush is the new president. Okay. And meanwhile, things are still left unresolved with the Temple Mount. Let's now move, though, to a different area just outside the Old City, which is in the city of David. And it's at the very bottom. It's called the Silwan Pool. And in 2003, bulldozers. These were not the same kind of bulldozers that were used on the Temple Mounts that were unknown to the Israeli Antiquities Authority. This was an area that, to clear out the area under the auspices of the Israel Antiquities Authority, bulldozers accidentally nearly destroyed this area. They were just initially, clearing the area. And Eli Shukron was there, and he stopped the bulldozers once he heard a scratch in the ground. And he knew that there was something of great value over there. And to see, to make the long story short, they uncover the step from the Herodian period, from the Second Temple period, what seems to be the largest mikvah of the Second Temple period that is known. Okay, so this was huge. The Siloam pool is also mentioned in the New Testament for Christians, where Jesus healed the blind. So this is a holy site for Christians. It's an historical site for Jews. One can even call it holy as well, of course, as it was a ritual bath used during the time of the temple. Here you could see a map of the area. This at the bottom would be the Siloam pool, which I was just telling you about. And this is the pilgrimage road. And there was a road that took you from the mikvah at the bottom at the time of the temple up the main road. It's all a large hill to get to the top, which then was Mount Zion. And on the top, the Holy of Holies was. So this is a great picture here because you could really see everything we were talking about in last class and today. Today, we're talking about this pilgrimage road. Last class, we spoke about the Western Wall tunnels along this side. And then we also spoke about Solomon's tables over here. So these sites are all highly political, highly significant with our history, and all related to the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. Here you can see what the pilgrimage road, which was discovered shortly afterwards, what it looks like today. I'd like to show you this video that does a great job telling the whole story.
This road is very special. It brought people together. It was a journey of a lifetime. This was the last part of a fantastic journey, a memorable journey, in fact, a journey that would never be forgotten, of families, people, children, elder people. They gathered in small towns and villages. They came together, and then they began their long trek in convoys up the main roads to Jerusalem. The last lap, the last 600 meters of this journey took place on the pilgrimage roads that we are excavating now.
All those thousands of people who used to come here and walk from the Siloam pool through the Pilgrim's Road all the way up to the Temple Mountain. People from all over the world.
Towards the end of the Second Temple period, Jerusalem went to war against the great empire of Rome. Thousands of people, fighters, and also civilians that survived, they escape underneath the ground into the drainage canal. And we found, under the pilgrimage road, the exact points, 5 points, where the Romans took sledgehammers and broke through the road and entered underneath the ground into the tunnel.
The wall of the drainage channel was missing, and that was an opening which allowed us to basically come from beneath and go above the drainage channel in order to begin the exposure of the street. I remember the first day when we crawled into that little opening in the drainage channel and we began to discover the edge of the street, and we realized what an important moment that was, because it was the moment where we could recreate what happened here 2,000 years ago.
עם התקדמות החפירה, המתח עלה, כיוון שהתחלנו לזהות אבן שיושבת בצורה אופקית ולא בצורת מפולת. הרגע הזה התחיל לצבות בלב, ופשוט מאוד האנשים אמרו, אולי זה מגיע כעת. לא עברו כמה שעות אחרי שפינינו את האדמה וזיהינו את הרחוב. ולאט לאט התחלנו לחפור, גילינו שכבת חורבן של בית שני על הרחוב. שטח שרוף, עצים שרופים, מטבעות שרופות, בגדים אפילו מצאנו בחלק של בדים.
אתה מוצא אפר. אתה חש ונוגע באפר של החורבן כשהוא קורה.
כל בוקר מגיעים לכאן כ100 עובדים, מלאי אידיאולוגיה, מלאי פאשן כזה, תשוקה לחפירות ארכיאולוגיות.
עליתי לארץ לפני כ3 שנים משוויץ, והגעתי לפה בשביל לממש את החלום שלי, לבוא ולחפור בארץ ישראל, במיוחד בירושלים.
את המפעל העצום שאתם רואים פה הם חופרים הקושונים. ואז בא עוד צוות ששם מסגרות ושם הנדסה. ובעצם יש לנו כאן איזשהו תמהיל של חפירה ארכיאולוגית תת-קרקעית, עם הנדסה הכי מתקדם שיש.
There is no other excavation in the world which puts in such an infrastructure. Nothing of this kind can be seen anywhere else.
כשהתחלתי לעבוד כאן בעיר דוד, אני קיבלתי את השטח הראשון שלי, ובאמת עשיתי את הכל לבד שם. ועכשיו לראות את זה ולהגיד, זאת העבודה שלי. זה מה שאני תרמתי לפרויקט הזה. זה מה שאני תרמתי, אולי באמת לעתיד שלנו.
תמיד חלמנו לעלות לירושלים. אני רוצה להמשיך, לחפור, לעשות היסטוריה, לפתוח הכל בשביל עם ישראל.
הרחוב הזה, הדרך הזה שאנחנו עכשיו דורכים עליו, זה בעצם 600 מטר החשובים ביותר בחיים הרוחניים של עם ישראל.
I have people working here from all over the world, and they have one thing in common: the passion for Jerusalem, the passion for this project. They want everyone to be part of what we feel every day. I'm walking on the steps of my ancestors.
Literally walking in their footsteps and touching history.
So it's a beautiful video. Not only does it tell us about the history of, the pilgrimage road and what you see when you're at the site and what it was like at the time of the temple, but it has this added dimension, and it also tells us a bit about who these archaeologists are. Who are the people who are actually doing the digging? And you saw an Ola Hadasha, a recent immigrant from Switzerland. You saw, I think there was somebody from France. There's also an Ethiopian, and you have Jews from all over the world who all of their stories and all are united, as they said, in their love for Jerusalem to uncover its ancient history. So now that we talked about the good side about the pilgrimage road and all of, of course, let's talk a bit about the controversy as well and the many challenges that go with it. So Arab residents in Silwan, they complained. They said that the archaeological digs are a threat to the infrastructure of their homes and can lead to a collapse of their homes. So Doron Spielman, who works at the City of David, he said all these claims are simply bogus. We are simply clearing out tunnels, and they were already dug there by King Herod. So that infrastructure is 2,000 years old, much older than the homes that have been there, which are maybe 100 or so years old. In 2009, this was brought to the Israeli High Court. And the Israeli High Court ruled on this case that it cannot tread upon the right of residents of the excavation area to live in tranquility. The excavation was legal, as well as it was an archaeologically important site. The judge, though, rejected the claim that the work was damaging the buildings above. So in summary, basically, the right of the residents to live in peace and have secure buildings is more important than archaeology. However, they found these claims to be unverified and just politically driven, as they weren't actual threats to the home. So this is Doron Spielman over here, who I quoted before, and he says the following: 60% of the Bible was written on this little hill. I can tell you with certainty that David, Solomon, Bathsheba, Jeremiah, Isaiah, all the prophets, all the kings of the ancient world, perhaps the Queen of Sheba, they all stood here. I feel King David's hand as I put my hand on this stone. And that's Doron Spielman talking about the importance of all of these sites. Just going to open the screen. So we see next, this is called the Givati parking lot, okay? And you can see what it looked like in the 2000s, okay? And then this is what it looks like today. So this parking lot eventually was excavated, and it looks like this today. There's no parking lot. Originally, though, in 2002, the plan was to build an underground parking lot with shops and make it, you know, a whole almost mini mall with mostly for parking. But archaeologists argued that the location, it's right there in between the city of David and the Western Wall. Of course, you're going to find valuable history buried underground. So in 2005, they started with the largest excavation area in Jerusalem. And what do they find? Well, in the 9th century, there's Muslim area marketplace. Underneath that, the deeper you dig, the older the findings. There was a hoard of gold Byzantine coins and a mansion from that area. Below that, a luxurious Roman villa from the 1st century. There's a Hellenistic citadel and ruins of a 2-story building destroyed by Babylonians in 586. They were hoping to get a 250 parking lot spaces, and instead they got 250 decades of Jerusalem history. In 2008, they discovered a cemetery from medieval times, and that, of course, is going to cause delays. And local Arab residents brought the digging to the Supreme Court, arguing that the work is destroying their property. The court ruled that the city of David tells the story of thousands of years of Jerusalem's history, which is both national and international importance. So here you could see local protests by Arab residents who are prioritizing their residential neighborhood over archaeological digs. Is it legitimate, these protests, or is it just anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian political forces? Is this something, you know, that's really just solely an issue of archaeology versus, you know, the right of these residents to have their homes and literally secure building spaces? Or, of course, is the whole larger Palestinian-Jewish conflict a part of this story? Here you can see a picture, and you may recognize some of the people here. That, of course, the lady in red is Sarah Netanyahu. Behind her, the former ambassador of the United States to Israel, David Friedman, under Donald Trump's presidency. Behind that is Jason Greenblatt. And there's some other big names who are in this picture that you just can't see in the picture. They're just behind on the scene. And this is from when David Friedman and Jason Greenblatt, they attended the inauguration of this pilgrimage road that we've been talking about. The picture is in July 2019, and it triggered angry denunciations from Palestinian and far left-wing circles for taking part in the settler project. Amongst one of those people as well was, who's been in the news quite recently, he's a staunch supporter of Israel, is U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. There was also the ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, the Israel Antiquities Authority Director, Israel Hassan, and also in the crowd is U.S. billionaire Sheldon Adelson and his wife Miriam. They were all present at this event. So Friedman, he wields a sledgehammer and breaks through a wall, ceremoniously opening this tunnel. Palestinians slams the participation of U.S. officials as recognition of Israeli sovereignty over East Jerusalem. I don't know if any of you have read David Friedman's book. It's called Sledgehammer. I've read it. It's an excellent book. And he starts off the book talking about this very event that he used a sledgehammer for. And it also, was a metaphor for so many other things. The event, of course, brought NGO, Emek Shaveh, activists who argued that because its location is in East Jerusalem, the decision to excavate the find, it was just motivated by politics rather than searching for any historical truth. Quote, the city of David brings biblical Jerusalem back to life. David Friedman counters all of this. Okay, he says it enables every one of us to stroll the corridors where the ancient prophets of Israel gave voice to revolutionary ideals of freedom, liberty, and human dignity. It is our unique privilege as Americans to walk together with our Israeli counterparts on the just unveiled pilgrimage road, where our shared ancestors ascended the flagstone steps in prayer and blessing. And this is all from a Jerusalem Post article. So a question is, what proof has been found that the Jews lived there before BC? What artifacts? How far back? Do you have any photos? Okay, so thank you for those questions. And you're welcome to interact as well if you wanted to say anything as well. I mean, for example, there's a lot of proof that there's been a Jewish presence that predates Jesus, for example. Just looking at that mikveh, for example, that's a Jewish ritual bath, which is uniquely Jewish. We found many mikvaot in the Jerusalem area and outside of Jerusalem. The Torah speaks about a mikveh, a ritual bath. The Mishnah, Jewish law, speaks about mikvaot. It's very clearly a Jewish structure, and it's been found in so many places. Another piece of evidence would be the menorah. The menorah is actually perhaps the longest Jewish symbol that still has relevance today. It's, of course, a symbol of the temple. And there have been countless depictions of the menorah that also date back to BC times. Go ahead.
I know. I mean, I studied some Jewish history over the years, and I know all this is sad. But I'm just wondering, with DNA and all these new tests that they can do, have they found, because the dates are not on the menorahs, on the figures or whatever things that are false, they don't have dates. So I'm just wondering, how do they know the dates?
I am so glad you're asking that, Parla, because I'm going to answer it. It's in my presentation. We're going to get to it in a few minutes. Okay.
Thank
you.
It's
an excellent question. Very, very important in archaeology. How do we know that the findings are, the age of these findings? So let's get there. Before we get there, I just want to talk about an interesting side topic about archaeology, which is, it's related to what you're saying, Parla, is the verification of these artifacts. How do we know that they're authentic? You wanted to know specifically about the age. This, was believed to be the scepter of the Judean high priest inside Solomon's temple. It was later declared as a forgery, though, and many argue its authenticity. So it was purchased for almost more than $500,000 in 1988 by the Israel Museum. It's actually still in the Israel Museum, but the explanation that some claim it to be a forgery is there. I guess if they spend, $500,000 on it, they're not going to trash it. They're still going to display it with that, caveat that it may not be real. And I don't think anyone considers it's real. It's been verified to be a forgery. King Yehoash's discovery. This was 1997. It was discovered in Tel Arad. It was claimed to be from the 6th century because of pottery that was around there. It mentions House of God, the letters Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. However, this too was later verified to be a forgery. Though you should know that this is authentic. Okay, so this is evidence as well. People believe that there was a temple in Jerusalem. In Tel Arad, they discover the they discovered the name of God, and it speaks about the house of God. So unlike the others, which are considered to be forgeries, this is considered by the experts to be authentic. And a Beit Hashem, is a reference to the temple in Jerusalem, the house of God. So that was found in Tel Arad in the Negev, northern Negev, and that's considered to be evidence that there was a temple, although it was not discovered in Jerusalem. We've mentioned this before, that this was in our second class, I believe, Lebeit HaTkiyah. So we have Hebrew script that's found on the Temple Mount. That's a reference to the shofar blast. It's Rosh Hashanah soon. We're going to be hearing the shofar. This is a reference to the Shabbat, Erev Shabbat, the Friday afternoon shofar blast. And this we also mentioned as well, which is Greek inscriptions warning foreigners not to enter the certain area of the temple compound. So we have found various inscriptions that do refer to temple practices. This is Eilat Mezar, and I know we're going to get to your questions soon. I just want to work in order. We'll get to the idea of how do we know the age of our artifacts. We'll get there soon. This is the granddaughter of Benjamin Mezar, who we saw a picture of her earlier as a little girl. And when she was not even 40 years old, she was one of the first females in the field of Jerusalem archaeology, and she was determined to find King David's palace. And she wrote an article about it in the Biblical Archaeological Review. She started her work in 1997. You can see over here, the blue is, okay, you can see this is all part of her discoveries. And she sees this in the city of David. She says this is not just any public building. This is a structure that was clearly the product of inspiration, imagination, considerable economic investment. Mezar dates the first phase of the building to the mid-10th century BCE when King David ruled Israel. And carbon dating, which is part of the answer to your question, dates her dating accurately. The only logical possibility was that she found King David's palace. And you can see the blue area over here is what is believed to be part of King David's palace. The yellow is an area of the Canaanite Zion fortress that when one opens up Samuel 2, when David conquers the city of Jebus and it becomes the city of David, which is Jerusalem, mentions there was already a structure there, which is the fortress of Zion, and the palace was built at the top of the city, according to Mezar's understanding. Now, this is Eilat Mezar's nemesis. His name is Israel Finkelstein, and he concluded that the building was no older than 6th century BCE, just prior to the Babylonian destruction. So now let's get into what is Eilat Mezar and Israel Finkelstein's debate all about. Finkelstein comes from Tel Aviv University, Mezar's from Jerusalem, and the Shalem Institute and other Jerusalem-based archaeological institutes. So Eilat Mezar is called a maximalist. And there are two camps of archaeologists, maximalists and minimalists. Just like we know that if we open up halacha, Jewish law, Talmud, etc., we know that there's Hillel and Shammai, and there's different opinions of rabbis and whatnot. So the same goes with archaeology. There are different opinions. And the maximalists, their approach to archaeology is that the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, that I have right behind me, is an historical book, unless archaeology proves it otherwise. Okay, these are not rabbis. These are not, observant Jews per se. They're traditional, and they value the Tanakh as an historical book. But if archaeology says otherwise, they'll reject the veracity of that particular story. Israel Finkelstein is called a minimalist from Tel Aviv University, and he and his camp, they start off that the Tanakh is fiction. There's no reason to believe that any of it is true unless archaeology proves it to be true. So they have opposite starting points. And how does Israel Finkelstein date the findings in this picture and Mezar? So there are three methods of dating. One is stratigraphy, which means generally speaking, the deeper you dig, the older the findings, although there can be exceptions to that. But their main way of dating is pottery shards. So the example I always give is as follows. Let's imagine it's 1,000 years into the future, and we are digging up Montreal. In 1,000 years from now, we're going to learn about this time period, the end of the 20th, early 21st century. And somebody finds a big black disc, and on the big black disc, it says on it, the Beatles. And they ask, the expert, what is that? So they say, that's a record. And that's from the 1960s or the 1970s, called a record player, okay? And then the next person comes along, finds a triangular, something that's not triangular, sorry, it's a rectangular, and there are 2 holes in it, and there's a kind of tape ribbon at the bottom. And so sorry about that. And they find something rectangular at the bottom, and that is called a cassette, Michael Jackson, whatever it is you want to call it, from 1980. Okay. After that, you have a silver disc. Okay, silver disc, and that would be called, let's say on the silver disc, I don't know, you have Nirvana or REM or whatever, and that's basically a CD from the 1990s. Then the next person has, an iPod. So just like we can date musical technology devices put the decade, you could give the same example with cars or styles of clothes, and the fashion goes with the times. So too with pottery of ancient times. And experts in pottery, I'm certainly not one of them, but I trust what they say. They're able to recognize pottery shards according to a century, according to an origin. So that's the main way of dating. But of course it's flawed. And that's why you have these findings, according to Eilat Mezar, from 10th century pottery. But then when you look at Israel Finkelstein says, no, this is 6th century pottery. Okay, so that's really the main source of their disputes. But of course, they each have their own narrative, and they're trying to fill out their narrative. So, there's 2 camps, and they're very politically driven as well. And ultimately, all I can tell you and all we really know is what the experts say in the different camps. But they use pottery shards to date. And the last thing that they use to date, and I'll show you this short video, is what's called carbon dating. This is, I think, just a 2-minute video that does a great job explaining it.
For over 150 years, we are excavating here in Jerusalem, and we are arguing about the date of every layer. For the first time, we are harnessing together hard sciences, archaeology, and biblical historiography in order to reconstruct more accurately the history of the city in its most crucial times.
Go actually to the field to get the samples. We search for the charred material or organic remains. We take the sediments under the microscope, and then we need to identify botanically the remains. Then we turn it into graphite and do the measurement at the AMS.
In the accelerator, the carbon is being accelerated to 3,000 kilometers per second, and that enables us to measure the level of C14 in very high accuracy. We also dated 100 single tree rings. We know that each ring is growing in 1 year. For example, this specific single ring was growing at 586 BC, at the same year of the destruction of the first temple.
The resolution of C14 was very, very bad. At 200, 300 years, it was impossible to distinguish anything else. With the work we have done in the city of David, we succeeded to reach a resolution less than 10 years, which is really something very, very new and dramatic.
אם עד היום חשבנו שאת החומה הזאת בנה המלך חזקיהו כחלק מההכנות שלו למצור האשורי בירושלים, היום אנחנו מבינים שהחומה נבנתה כ100 שנים לפני כן על ידי המלך עוזיהו, אחרי רעידת האדמה שפקדה את ירושלים בתחילת מלכותו. מתכתב עם התיאור המקראי ואבן עוזיהו מגדלים בירושלים ויחזקאל.
I'm holding in my hand a skull of a bat that was found here in the niche behind me. And this bat entered the niche somewhere around 760, 770 BCE, the days of King Uzziah. And from this bat, we can reconstruct the time that Jerusalem expanded from the old core by the spring into the areas to the west. For us, the bat is like a time capsule.
During the 10th century BCE, the days of David and Solomon, this research has shown that the city is occupied in different areas and seems to have been larger than we thought previously. We can pinpoint specific buildings and relate them to specific kings mentioned in the biblical text, such as Uzziah, Hezekiah, Menashe, and others.
This research is really exciting. We managed to come together, a group of scholars from different institutions, and really publish something that will be quoted for generations to come.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and I hope that does somewhat answer your question. But once again, carbon dating is also a method to date the findings. Carbon dating only works with things which were once alive. So the example in the video was the bones of a bat, or what's very common is olive pits or date pits, wood, and actually fecal matter is something else that they sometimes discover. All these things they're able to carbon date, and what you saw in the video, and that's only 4 months old, is that they've even advanced so much from what they were able to do 10 years ago, 20 years ago in carbon dating to be more precise to even the decade. So, you know, how exactly does carbon dating work? That's really for a chemist, a scientist to explain. It's beyond my scope. But you know, I just tell you what the experts do say. But yet there's still room for dispute between these two camps. Yeah, question?
Well, this is not a question. I was at a Weitzman. I didn't know they were doing this kind of investigation. But what I wanted to say before this was how is it that the cities were built one on top of the other? But he just mentioned an earthquake. So that probably decimated.
Well, exactly. And we spoke about bulldozers, right? That's a modern invention. And today, if you have a building and you want to build something new in that area, it's an old building, you take your bulldozers, you take your whole demolition, machinery of modern technology, you get rid of the old bricks and whatever it's made of, and then you empty the area and you build new. But back in the ancient times, they didn't have the bulldozers. They didn't have the demolition machinery. So they just left the old stuff below and kind of simply built over it. So that helps archaeologists, but that's what they did at the time. They didn't, trash didn't really go anywhere, including from buildings. It just was right below you. You built over it.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for the questions. Something else that has been discovered, which is really important in archaeology, is what's called boule. And the way boule works is, if you look at my ring, back in those days, you would have a signature on your ring, and the signature, it's called, in Hebrew, it's called tabat. It's mentioned in the Torah many times. And Hashverosh had a tabat, he had a ring, and Judah had a tabat, and many important people had their own signature ring. And let's say I were to sing this scrap piece of paper. In ancient times, if I wrote a top secret letter in here, I would put a clay seal on the paper, and then while it's still soft, I would put my signature on the clay. You'd see that my signature was on it, and then the person who would receive this would know that nobody tampered with the letter because you could still see my signature imprinted on the scroll. And that was the common practice. And in the city of David, they've discovered dozens and dozens of these signature prints. And it's, somebody when, back in the day before smartphones, when I was in tour guide school, they described it as finding a telephone book from Jerusalem of ancient times. I can't really say that to most crowds today because if they're under 30, they don't know what a telephone book is. But you guys, I think you guys get the point. You understand, as I do. I remember telephone books when I was a kid. So anyways, you get the idea that they have names of residents of Jerusalem, important residents of Jerusalem from biblical times. And they've actually found boule of some biblical characters. Now, most of the names are not names that are household names. Yehochal and Gemaryahu ben Shaphan. These are people who are mentioned in the book of Jeremiah and Isaiah. And, unless you are interested in archaeology or you've won the Chidon Tanakh, the Bible contest, you wouldn't know these names. However, there are a few big names of Boulay that they did discover. And the biggest one would be this one, Hezekiah, which was discovered, I think, just under 10 years ago. King Hezekiah's signature on a boulay. So this is a huge discovery. When I was last in the Israel Museum, I did not see it there. I'm not so sure if it is being stored in a museum for the public to see yet. As far as I know, it's not yet, but it's a magnificent discovery that sheds light on the history of Jerusalem and the Bible, the signature of one of the greatest kings of the first temple period. He was at the same time as the prophet Isaiah. So this is a huge discovery as well. This is another very, very recent. I put this in because this is like just from 2 months ago, I think, a seal imprint that they just found in Jerusalem. He was over this summer.
מצאנו את החותם הכי יפה מתקופת בית ראשון שנמצא בירושלים הקדומה עד היום. החותם נמצא במהלך חפירות של רשות העתיקות, ממונות על ידי עיר דוד. החותם מראה דמות של שד מקונף, מאפיין את האומנות האשורית, והכתב הוא ברוורס כדי לאפשר את הכתב שנחתם להיות קריא. בו מופיע שם, כנראה חלק מהאצולה שהושפע על ידי התרבות הנאו-אשורית.
אותו יועזר בן הושעיה, תושב ירושלים, יש לו זהות מקומית, אבל הוא גם חלק ממרחב. הוא רוצה להזדהות, להגיד, אני חלק מהמרחב. עדיין הייתה לו זהות מקומית, לכן הוא כותב בכתב עברי. השם שלו הוא שם עברי, ששייך ליהודה. בעל החותם השתמש בזה כדי להחתים פיסות כאלה שסגרו את האגרות שנשלחו, במקרה הזה מירושלים, למקומות אחרים.
אלה חותמות הם נדירים מאוד, כשאתה מחזיק אותו בפעם הראשונה, אתה מבין שאתה מחזיק משהו שונה מהרגיל. החותם
שהתגלה הוא מצטרף לשרידים נוספים מימי הבית הראשון, שמצביעים למעשה על כך שהעיר ירושלים המקראית, התקיימה לא רק באזור עיר דוד, אלא התפרסה צפונה לכיוון המתחם המקודש. סיפורו של החותם, כמו של ממצאים אחרים מימי הבית הראשון, יוצגו בכנס מחקרי עיר דוד בחודש ספטמבר הקרוב. כולם מוזמנים.
So that's an example of boulay, and that was one of the more recent discoveries that has been found. So we just have a few more slides to conclude the whole story, take us to where Jerusalem stands currently in 2024. Archaeologists in Jerusalem, more than anywhere else on the planet, have always confronted a past that remains so stubbornly present. They inevitably depend on patrons who invariably come with agendas and must anticipate opponents who might launch even a street riot. There are more digs in the fast-growing Jerusalem with a population of nearly 1 million than in any other city in the world. During peaceful and healthy times, Jerusalem is one of the planet's fastest-growing tourist destinations. And this, of course, is Michael Oren, who was the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. And at 2018, he was at an exhibit near the Temple Mount. And this is a quote of his. Such archaeological attractions also demonstrate that we're not interlopers or migrants. We're not survivors of the Holocaust that Europe dumped here. The work is central to our validity, legitimacy, and security. Archaeology is not just about revealing the past, it's about acquiring the present and ensuring our future. So that statement is loaded with so much politics, with so many messages there, that it's not just about the history, it's also about Israel today, and of course, the conflict of who owns Jerusalem. And of course, we have to talk about the other side. This is Mahmoud Abbas, okay? And Mahmoud Abbas says the following. Israel's never-ending digging is part of a Zionist conspiracy to vindicate the Israeli narrative by erasing nearly 1,400 years of Muslim presence. Okay, and that's his quote. So they clearly have their own agenda. As I mentioned before, Yasser Arafat denied that there ever was a temple. And they've made all kinds of claims about the temple being elsewhere, not in Jerusalem. You know, as Muslims, really their idea of world history before Muhammad is a completely different story than what the Judeo-Christian Bible tells. Because the Quran is filled with stories about biblical stories, but it's told not in a chronological way. And Muhammad will teach all kinds of teachings in the Quran and just tell a story about Moses here and Abraham there and Ishmael and Jeremiah and King David, and it's all over the place. And they construct their own history that's very, very different than the Judeo-Christian narrative. And so therefore, you know, and really everything pre-Muhammad does not have much relevance to a religious Muslim, which is also part of, yes.
If Judaism hadn't been there,
yeah,
do you think that Muhammad would have had anything to talk about?
I mean, you know, what if questions in history, right? I'm not sure if it's even worth entertaining because, you know, we just got to deal with the reality of what is. And the reality is the Jewish people. Jerusalem is the holiest city. And we have had a temple, the first temple and the second temple for about 1,000-year period, right? And then Muhammad, which we didn't really talk about the history because we were really just dealing with archaeology in this course. But, you know, it is important to note that historically, no serious academic will deny the fact that there was a temple in Jerusalem and that, you know, there was a Jewish kingdom there. No serious academic will argue that Jesus lived in Jerusalem. These are known as historical facts. However, Muhammad being ever in Jerusalem, you have to be a religious Muslim who believes in supernatural miracles to believe that Muhammad was ever in Jerusalem, because he lived in Saudi Arabia. And according to the Quran, he took a journey, and the journey was to Al-Aqsa. And that's what's the Al-Aqsa is Arabic for the furthest place. And only after Muhammad's death, in their commentaries about 2 generations after Muhammad, they locate Al-Aqsa in 691, and he died in 632, to be Jerusalem. And that's when Jerusalem becomes the 3rd holiest site, 60 years after Muhammad's death, by them locating Al-Aqsa to be Jerusalem. And that's the earliest record of Jerusalem being suggested to be this, you know, mysterious Al-Aqsa location. You know, he really never left Saudi Arabia in his lifetime, with that, you know, exception of this night journey. I imagine, you know, people who don't believe in supernatural miracles, and I'm a religious Jew, and I do believe that in ancient times they did exist, the story of Passover, etc. But those rationalist, secular academics may interpret that to be a dream or whatnot, because there's no historical evidence of Muhammad ever being in the land of Israel. In fact, Jerusalem is never mentioned in the Quran.
But some of his stories or figures relate to the Bible, right?
Pardon?
Some of Muhammad in the Quran, I studied it not like intimately, but I did read it. And from what many, many years ago, from what I remember, there's a lot of references to the Bible. The idea,
yeah.
What I mean when I asked you the question, what would Muhammad have come up with if there wasn't the Jewish religion? Maybe he wouldn't have had a religion. I don't know.
Yeah, look, I mean, both Islam and Christianity are very much influenced by Judaism as the original monotheistic faith. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, and the last quote Benjamin Netanyahu, who still, he still, of course, has many, many quotes. I don't know if anyone heard his speech on Friday at the United Nations. It was very, very biblical, and the timing was masterful, as he knew exactly what the plan about Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and had Nasrallah executed just moments after he gave his United Nations speech. But this is from 2011, and he was in front of the United Nations, just like on Friday, and he said it's been proven without a doubt that Jerusalem is the main artery of our national consciousness. The root of Zionism is in Zion, right? So he says over here, in my office in Jerusalem, there's an ancient seal, a signet ring of a Jewish official from the time of the Bible. The seal was found right next to the Western Wall. It dates back 2,700 years to the time of King Hezekiah. There's a name on the Jewish official inscribed on the ring. His name was Netanyahu, right? Yeah. So we see the connection of ancient Israel to the modern state of Israel. And Jerusalem, may it continue to be, or let's bring more peace, I should say, to Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, the city of peace. May it be a place that once again can be thriving with tourism, with Jews and non-Jews from all over the world to get religious inspiration to be better people. And there's still so much more in Jerusalem waiting to be uncovered by more digs. And, and thank you so much for joining. If you guys just stay on it, just wanted to,